Today's gospel text is taken from the book of Mark, the 16th chapter, verses 1 through. After the death of Jesus on Good Friday, when the Saturday Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, and Salome bought spices so that they might go and anoint Jesus. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. They had been saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance to the tomb?" When they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled back. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe, sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been raised. He is not here. Look, there is the place they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you." So they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. The gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. The congregation may be seated. Christ is risen. He is risen indeed. Most of us live most of our lives with one foot in Good Friday and one foot in Easter Sunday. One foot in death, one foot in life. A foot in confusion, the other in understanding and peace. Partly in sorrow, partly in joy. On Good Friday, we of course lived fully into the death of Jesus Christ. We lived fully into the pain, sorrow, and sin of this world. And Good Friday is hard to experience. After the service, somebody came into my office and said, "It feels like we just experienced a funeral." And then he smiles and says, "But it feels good on Sunday morning when we walk in and celebrate Easter." And he's right. This is exactly what Holy Week is all about. The sorrow and the joy. We can't have the joy without the sorrow. We can't have life without the death. This is the theology of the cross. Victory of life over death. Out of death comes life, out of despair comes hope, out of sorrow comes joy. Today, something has changed. Something has happened. In fact, everything has changed. We have journeyed together through the 40 days of Lent. We shared together in the Last Supper of Maundy Thursday. We grieved the death of Jesus on Good Friday, and now we celebrate Easter. But come Monday morning, has anything changed? What does this mean for you and for me in our everyday lives? Does this story of the cross have anything to do with us? Jeremy was a kid in my youth group. Started smoking pot when he was 13, an alcoholic, an addict at 18. He's been stabbed 3 times, witnessed a murder. His 2 best friends have died. I was a part of his intervention when he was 22. And now, when I see him clean and sober, as a drug and alcohol rehabilitation counselor, when I see him, I know I am looking at death and resurrection. Andy was 14 when his parents were divorced. He struggled with family, friends, and school. And after an altercation at school, an adult told me that Andy was nothing but white trash, and that's all he was ever going to be. 10 years later, I was a pastor in the emergency room, and an EMT brought in a 3-month-old that was dying. We did everything we could to save that child's life. And when I looked across that hospital gurney, the EMT was Andy. This kid that an adult had said is nothing but white trash and that's all he's ever going to be. Here he was, saving lives. And when I saw him across that hospital gurney, I knew what I was looking at was death and resurrection. Harold was an old man I visited in the hospital. He was a World War II veteran. And when we visited, he said it was the first time in 65 years that he talked about it. And now when he was facing his own death, he knew he had to release some of this. And he told me a story about how he was the one who located and identified an enemy submarine. And when his ship fired upon that submarine, he ran up to the deck to see the submarine surface, and he witnessed hundreds of people dying. And he felt like it was his fault. He carried around with him for 65 years. And when we talked about it, he said, "I'm convinced that I'm going to hell." And when I proclaimed the promise of salvation to him, and the tears rolled down his face, and he smiled, and I could see the relief in his eyes, I knew I was looking at death and resurrection. And I look around this room. Some of you, I know your story. Some of you, I don't. But I know that all of our stories are marked with struggle. Stories of love and loss, of life and death, divorce, new beginnings, old habits, addiction and abuse, property disputes, the differences of opinions and theologies, mishaps and mistakes. Yet here we are, sitting together on Easter Sunday, worshiping, singing together, and praying together. And when I look at us, I know that I'm looking at death and resurrection. Does this story of the cross have anything to do with us? It has everything to do with us. That's exactly why it happened. You see, it's not about changing for God. It's about being changed by God. We can't experience life and death and resurrection without being changed. You see, this whole story of God is about death and resurrection. This whole story of God is about you. What is it in your life that needs to die, and what is it that needs to take on new life? Galatians 5 says, the acts of our sinful nature include hatred, selfishness, and envy. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. In the victory of the resurrection, Jesus puts death to death. Today, because of the resurrection, we have the power to put hatred to death. We have the power to put selfishness and envy to death. And we also have the power to give new life to love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. If you've never been a person of faith, I think all of us can agree on this. Our world can use a little more love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. You see, this is the power of the resurrection. It's the victory of love over hate. It's the victory of hope over despair. It's the victory of forgiveness over sin. It's the victory of life over death. Whether you're a doctor or a lawyer or a prostitute or a pastor or a mom or a dad or a thief or a felon, a sinner or a saint or somewhere in between, today is a new day. Life has changed. Everything has changed. Who we were yesterday is not who we are today. Most of us live most of our lives with one foot in Good Friday and one foot in Easter Sunday. One foot in death, one foot in life. Partly in joy, partly in sorrow. But not today. Today we fully live into the victory of Jesus Christ. Today we fully live into the victory of the cross, the victory of life over death. Today we fully live into the love of God in Jesus Christ. Christ is risen. He is risen indeed. To God be the glory, now and forever.